Welcome to the Association of Inspectors General webinar on Inspectors General and the coronavirus pandemic. My name is Stephen Street, and I am the president of the National Association of Inspectors General. As you know, the coronavirus pandemic presents enormous challenges for the community of inspectors general throughout the United States. Among those challenges are, how do we operate remotely with the requirements of physical and social distancing with most of our staff working remotely? How are we able to overcome technological challenges when we're unable to really function in the field? And also, how do we conduct meaningful oversight of the massive stimulus relief package that has been passed during this time? How do we oversee these trillions of dollars at the federal, state, and local level? So today, you're going to hear from inspectors general from all over the country to give their thoughts, let you know a little bit about their experiences so far, and how we can function together as a community to keep the oversight function alive. We hope you enjoy this webinar. Joining us today as panelists will be Allison Lerner from the National Science Foundation and SIGI Vice Chair. Allison, you can wave, right? I see you there.
Okay.
Good, excellent. And Roy Wesley from California, the OIG for the Department of Corrections out there. I see you, Roy. Glad you're in with us. Excellent. Okay. Melinda Miguel, Chief IG for the state of Florida, my old friend. Yes.
Hey.
And Carolyn recording from the New York Metro Transit Authority IG. Carolyn, waving. Good. Excellent. And Natalie Monroe, First Assistant IG for the state of Massachusetts. And Natalie, can you hear us? You can wave. There you go. All right. Excellent. So we're going to talk about a number of things. And I know it was discussed that each speaker would go for about 15 minutes and then maybe open it up for questions. I am going to moderate this the same way that I would one of the panel discussions, for instance, like the ones that we had in Palm Beach. And that means that we can jump back and forth whenever one of the 6 speakers has a comment, please chime in and we can shift the discussion wherever it needs to go in the moment to cover the issues that are of most importance to people. And then when we get to the end, I believe we're going to open this thing up for questions from the rest of you, and Ned can handle the logistics of that. I think he sent out an email earlier explaining how you guys do that, and there's a way to raise your hand, let Ned know that you have a question, and then he can unmute you, and you can briefly ask your question, and then the panelists can tackle that. Okay, so let me go ahead and start, and my plan here is to moderate and maybe let the other speakers speak a lot more today. That's kind of the plan. There's a lot of brain power on this call, and I hope we can get a lot of interesting and useful information out of it. Let me start with the situation down in Louisiana. I am in the office of State Inspector General right now. It's just me and my general counsel. The office is otherwise deserted. We've been on this skeleton crew now for about, well, I guess since the middle of March. We have a similar stay-at-home order here in Louisiana to almost every one of you are going through something very, very similar. Let me give you the numbers from down here, and you may notice that they're a little bit worse down here, mainly, we think, because of Mardi Gras taking place in the middle of February in New Orleans. And so we have a pretty good concentration of cases down there. But as of this morning, we have 16,284 confirmed cases of COVID-19. Now you compare that with a population of around 3 million in our state. We have 582 confirmed deaths, and another roughly 2,000 are hospitalized presently for the condition, and about 500 of those are on ventilators. We have completed nearly 75,000 tests. So that's one of the reasons the numbers are going up, because the tests are becoming a lot more accessible and they're being returned a lot quicker. We now have 63 of our 64 parishes have got confirmed cases. So that is, that took and to give you a reference there, when we were at the institutes in Jacksonville, we had less than 10 confirmed cases at that time. So that was rough, not even quite 30 days ago. You can see how this is sort of blown up down in the state of Louisiana. Now, let me tell you what, we've got this skeleton crew at the office. There are times where I've been here by myself, pretty much all day. I've been working from home probably 50% of the time. I have a chief investigator who is in here often by himself or with our general counsel. It's usually 2 of us, sometimes 3 at the most. We are manning the phones, manning the online complaint database, and we are doing the very best that we can to try to handle business as it comes in. But as you might imagine, that things are a challenge for us. One of the biggest challenges that the Louisiana Inspector General has is that we are a law enforcement agency that works white collar criminal public corruption cases. That's probably 90% of the work product that comes out of our office. And that can be extremely difficult when it comes to actually doing the field work that is necessary to make those cases. And we've had multiple grand juries that were canceled because of this or postponed indefinitely. As you know, the United States Attorney's offices are essentially on a skeleton crew. The Bureau here in Baton Rouge has 1 person there working 2-week shifts, and then they switch to another person. We have had, luckily no one on my staff yet has contracted COVID, but we have had some of the FBI people that we work with have tested positive. Luckily they've gotten over it, have not had like really severe cases that required hospitalization. The biggest challenge for us, I believe, is that, once we open back up for business, we have about 5 or 6 pretty decent sized criminal cases that are going to break probably pretty quickly. Those were on the verge of being indicted. We have another couple that are set for trial. But we're going to, I'm afraid, experience a pretty big gap after that because of the inability to put staff in the field. And right now, personal safety and trying to make sure that we flatten the curve and don't spread this thing are causing me to keep about 90% of my staff at home. I have got them doing online training. I've got them accessing all of the databases that they have access to. And the thing we're doing is we're bracing for COVID criminal fraud cases. I do not have the size of the staff. For instance, we have nowhere near the personnel of the federal IGs, and I'm sure that Allison can elaborate on that in a little bit. But we certainly don't have the ability to oversee the expenditure of several $billion. And I think the latest figures are that Louisiana is going to get around 1.8 billion. And that obviously there's going to be oversight that's done by our state auditor and also from the federal IGs that are going to be looking at that as it comes down here. But we still will be in a position to, I believe, make good criminal cases for people that are essentially lying, cheating, and stealing with that money. And the point of reference that I have are the multiple hurricanes that we've had here. The biggest being in 2005 with Hurricane Katrina. There was massive fraud after that. And similar cases during Gustav and Ike and just the different storms. I know that Melinda may chime in on that too with the amount of fraud that's taken place in Florida under similar circumstances. So we're going to jump on those things. But there may be a pretty big gap in our productivity, and I think it's understandable. But we're going to have to jump back in and try to see what we can do to close that gap. The other interesting thing is that our legislature is obviously out of business at the moment. Now we don't know when they're going to come back, but let me tell you how that affects me. For those of you who don't know, I am up for reappointment as the Louisiana IG. I was appointed twice by a Republican, and I have been re-nominated by the current Democrat governor of Louisiana to serve a 3rd term as the IG here. That has to be confirmed by the Louisiana Senate, or I will remain as an at-will employee. And so hopefully we'll be able to get that done. It's sometime in May or June, or they'll jump into a special session because there are other appointees that have to be confirmed. The other issue, and we have no way of knowing yet how this is going to affect us, but the state budget is going to be in shambles because a lot of the revenue projections are based on sales taxes. Not just that, but also the price of oil, which has dramatically dropped. There's going to be a revenue estimating conference sometime in May, but I think we're bracing for some pretty serious budget hits down here. And we're hoping that some of the money that's been allotted through the stimulus will be able to fill some of those holes. And that's just a general update on where we are down here in Louisiana. I've visited with several of you, and I know that one of the things that we want to talk about today and get everybody's viewpoint is how we can be most effective when we are sort of limited in terms of the field work that we're allowed to do. And so one of the, obviously, internet access allows you to follow news, local and state news very carefully and national news very carefully. And it also allows you to access, there's some records that can be accessed electronically. And there are others. Just to give you one idea, we have several boxes of records that came to us on a federal criminal investigation, and we have to figure out how to get those safely delivered to the staff members of mine that are going to be analyzing those things. And so we've got to set up a delivery where we can drop that off and still maintain the safe social distancing. So with that, let me kind of, I'd like to throw it to Allison, I think, because I've sort of given a state perspective, but I'd like Allison from DC to kind of let us know. Please disregard that fire alarm, y'all. That I apologize for that. I believe they're doing work on that system. Hopefully it won't be a problem. But Allison, would you just quickly give us an update of where you are and I'll probably ask each of you to give a similar sort of 5-minute overview of your own personal situations in your IG's office and with regard to SIGI and where you guys are.
Stop ringing. Thank you, Stephen, for turning the floor over to me. And thank you to all of you at the AIG for making this webinar possible. I think it's a great moment for us to get together and see how we are grappling with this incredible challenge and pick up good ideas and maybe share a few of our own. So Stephen, I'll start by giving a quick high-level overview of where SIGI is. For those of you who don't know, SIGI is the Council of the Inspectors General for Integrity and Efficiency. It's the umbrella group of federal IGs. And we are in a situation that feels pretty familiar, somewhat familiar, I should say. When Congress passed the CARES Act on March 25th, they were definitely inspired by what happened with the Recovery Act back in 2009 and worked carefully to build a lot of oversight into the CARES Act. And so what you see money going directly to individual offices of Inspector General and agencies that have received a great deal of funding. Examples include the SBA IG received an additional $25 million, which is about the equivalent of their annual appropriation. So that's a huge amount of money for them to receive, and now they'll figure out how to utilize that to engage in appropriate oversight of what's happening there. Beyond that, though, there was inspiration taken from the Recovery Board that was established back in 2009. But that was an independent board that was staffed with many inspectors general. It was created as an independent board because in 2009, SIGI was in its infancy, just a few months old and barely stood up. 11 years later, we're a pretty robust organization. So now what Congress did was, instead of creating a separate standalone oversight board, they created a committee within SIGI called the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee. And the purpose of that committee is to kind of use the convening and coordinating and collaborating power that SIGI has to foster the Inspectors General oversight activities related to the coronavirus. Among other things, the committee has 30 days to create a public-facing website akin to what the Recovery Board had back in 2009. So we are working as quickly as we can to get that up and functional. It's going to be an iterative process, given the complexity of all of the material that is expected to be conveyed there. But that is, we're moving swiftly given the 30-day requirement. We also have 30 days to find a person to be the executive director of the committee. And we obviously need someone who has strong oversight experience. And I think the statute specifically is seeking people who have expertise in accounting, although obviously not limited to that. So if you know people who are interested in that position that come from the oversight world, you can send resumes to me. We have, after the 30 days, another 90 days to get a deputy executive director in place. So there are two specific roles that we're working to fill right now. And any insights you have there would be greatly appreciated. And the committee has a total of $80 million that it can use over the 5 years of its existence. It's set to sunset in September of 2025. And we are already meeting. There are 9 statutory members of the committee, but the SIGI chair had the ability to invite other inspectors general to participate. So we are now up to a total of 21 IGs. We meet twice a week, and we are working as swiftly as we can under these challenging circumstances to start coordinating, and figuring out our strategy and our strategic plan, and getting this organization up to as quick a start as we can. Beyond that, the CARES Act also established a special inspector general for pandemic recovery within the Department of the Treasury. And that's focused specifically on some of the Treasury programs, loans, loan guarantees, and other matters of that nature. So while we are working to staff the Pandemic Response Accountability Council, right now the president has nominated an individual to serve as the Special Inspector General for Pandemic Relief. But until that person is confirmed, that office can't really get up and running because it has to be created from whole cloth. And that office has $25 million, and it will sunset 5 years after the date of enactment, or September 25th of 2025. So that's kind of a high-level overview of where the federal government is. And I will give you my perspective as an IG and kind of share some insights I've seen from some of my peers at other agencies, where obviously, because there are 74 IGs, 75 when the SIGPER is confirmed. We range in size from huge to tiny. And so there's all different, people are at different levels of capacity to respond to this. I have an office of about 70 employees, and fortunately for us, we had automated and made many of our workflows electronic even before this happened. So that helped us as we adjusted to what is right now essentially 100% telework. The other good thing that helped us is that we had the vast majority of our staff was telework ready. And so when we saw this coming down the road, we made sure that people who didn't have a telework agreement in place got one, that we had people equipped for, a long-term stay away from the office. And then, we showed up on the Monday after that, ready to work. And we've made some adjustments to our processes. We have automated our process for issuing subpoenas. We used to require what my head of investigations calls a wet signature. I had to actually sign each subpoena. We've now made the process entirely digital, including using a digital signature for me, so that we can keep those subpoenas moving and going out. We generally seek production under subpoenas in electronic format. So assuming there's someone out there to receive our subpoena and respond to it, we're in a good place to begin our analysis of the records. If the challenge we're facing is, I'm in the Office of Inspector General that the bulk of the people that receive our funding are colleges and universities, and most of those are shut down. So even though if people can remote into their systems, often what we're seeking are downloads from general ledgers, they can do that remotely, but not everyone is able to do that. So we are certainly experiencing a slowdown in our work there. We've also we used FaceTime to swear out a warrant in a district in Tennessee rather than having an agent travel for the first time. That's allowable under the federal rules of criminal procedure. So we'll probably be doing that in the future as well. So we're trying to keep everything moving as quickly as we can. Some material does come into the building, and right now, no one is allowed into the building unless they have a mission critical need to enter. And so, one of those mission critical needs is the need for someone from my office once a week to stop by and see, what might be coming in by mail to us as by way of, allegations of fraud, waste, or abuse, and also to pick up any subpoena returns that are other important communications that are still coming to us the old-fashioned way. We've made adjustments to our website, encouraging people to use the electronic means of communicating with us during this period, but not everyone's able to do that. In terms of real-time work, that's less of an issue for my office than it is for some of my peers in the IG community. I know that my colleagues at the Veterans Administration and HHS IG have had people out in the field, throughout this doing work and, real-time work to add value at this moment of great concern. And like you, Stephen, as we make our way through this extended period, I know our work is going to slow down, especially on the audit side of the house, since many, we are at a point where a lot of our auditors had just received material from entities that we're in the process of auditing, so they have a lot to keep them busy now. But when they get through that, I think the spigot may run a bit dry. So we are ensuring that folks have we have some cost-effective training. We're trying to make sure that people, if they have downtime, are filling that by ensuring that they get the training that they need done to comply with audit standards. And we are also recognizing that there are places across the federal government, there are calls out there if staff don't have enough to keep them busy right now, which isn't the case for us at the moment, but depending on how long this goes, it could become. There are opportunities for them to help out other agencies that truly do need additional folks, and that includes places like the SBA. SIGI is also interested in having people support the standing up of the Pandemic Relief Accountability Committee. So I think that's a high-level analysis or assessment of where we stand as a community, and some examples of where my office is doing. And I'll happily pass the torch back over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Allison. One question I had what is the ability of federal IGs to do TDYs of personnel as needed? Do you guys have the ability to shift personnel around to different IGs offices as to fill a gap that may exist?
Yes, you can do that. There are several mechanisms, even without the flexibilities that the Office of Management and Budget and the Office of Personnel Management are highlighting and creating specifically for pandemic relief. But we already have mechanisms through the Economy Act to share resources.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good to know. One thing is for sure that you guys are going to be, and I say you guys, I'm talking about SIGI and the entire community of federal IGs are going to really be on the front lines of this with over $2 trillion. And there was an article yesterday that they're going to possibly be seeking as much as another 200 to 300 billion This may be the largest relief package that's ever been done in American history. And my gosh, and you guys have got the massive oversight responsibilities at the federal level. But one thing I'd like to talk about with our other panelists that work at the state level is how we're going to deal with as that money trickles down into state agencies and into individual contractors, subcontractors, because that's where a lot of the fraud really takes place. And so a lot of times this was our experience with Katrina, because we had a massive amount of money that came into the whole Gulf Coast region, but New Orleans in particular. And a lot of the oversight of those funds were just agreed upon procedures audits. In other words, just looking for documentation to support expenditures, but because of a lack of manpower, not really the ability to drill down to that documentation and see whether it was actually real and represented expenditures that actually did occur. And so that's an office like ours digs into those kinds of things. And so if we see an invoice, we're actually going to check to see whether that invoice is real. And those are the kind of things that when you get down at the local level and the state level, I believe there's going to be some massive fraud cases that are almost certainly going to develop. Thank you so much, Allison, for that overview. That was very informative. And I'm sure we're going to come back to you before this call is over.
Sure. And just before you move on, Stephen, I just want to say it's for the very point you made, it's vital that there be, great collaboration and as much coordination as possible between those of us at the federal level and those of you at the state and local IG level. I think it'll be better for everyone if we can work together, because this is too much for, any of us to tackle on our own.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. And I think this is where the community of IGs can kind of stand together, to not only share information and resources, but to emphasize the importance of this, because, I know that the taxpayers are going to be expecting us to watch over this money. So thank you so much, Allison. I truly appreciate it. I'm going to kind of go in sort of the order that we had. I'd like to throw it to Roy for a minute. Roy, your situation, if you could just let us know how you're doing, but also address some of the challenges. I'm familiar with the fact that, for instance, anytime an inmate that's in state custody at one of your DOC facilities, anytime an inmate dies, that you typically dispatch personnel to that facility to oversee the investigation of that death. And I know now you're having to do that remotely. That's got to be a challenge. So can you, first of all, just let us know kind of how you're operating and what your challenges have been?
Just some context on the numbers that you gave, Steve. As of yesterday in our state, we had somewhat over 16,000 confirmed cases of the virus and something under 400 deaths. That's in a state with 40 million people. So the comparison is pretty stark to me. We in this state did get started a little bit early than other states in what we're calling physical distancing and the stay at home. So that has had a pretty big impact on how we do our work. Our oversight agency, of course, is corrections, and we are a monitoring model. So we don't do investigations, and as yet we have not done any audits, although in the last legislative session, we were given authority to do those audits. When this hit, we were in the midst of hiring our audit staff and getting set up to start those audits in a couple of months. But so overwhelmingly, we are real-time on-scene monitoring agency. So as you said, when there's a death, when there's a riot, when there's some what we call critical incident, the department has an hour to notify us. We get somebody on the road immediately, and show up to monitor the department's response to that critical incident. We've had to do that by telephone and by email. So the impact has been that we're not, I don't think, seeing what we would normally see when we go out to an institution. And let me give you an example. We had an inmate homicide years ago, actually when I was doing these rollouts. And the crime scene was outside on an exercise yard that had a running track and some grass. They secured that crime scene, and then no one shut off the sprinklers. And while we were there, the sprinklers came on and washed away all the evidence. So those are the things that we won't see with remote monitoring. Had we not been there, we wouldn't know that. That's not something that I think they would have volunteered to us. The other impact that we are experiencing, and I think we have, at least so far, done a pretty good job of controlling, is the problem of when you work from home, having secure systems that you can't, that are free from outside malicious influence. So, for example, the Department of Corrections here has 65,000 employees, and they have about 10% of their workforce working from home. They did not have the infrastructure, the computer infrastructure to do that. So many of their folks are working on their home computers, on their home networks. One of the battles that we've fought with the department for years is access to their databases and their servers. We do have a fairly strong statute here that gives us access. So I don't have to do subpoenas. All I have to do is ask them. And if they refuse to provide me the information, then it is a misdemeanor. And so one of the pushbacks that we've gotten often from the department is that they're concerned that we will compromise their data and that a breach will happen as a result of our entry into their system. Here in the office, we're on a statewide network that risk is fairly low. But now working from home, we were very concerned that if there were a data breach, that they would point at us and say, you can't have this information anymore because it's not secure with you. So we spent a lot of time and effort getting secure access from home. And part of that was sort of happenstance on our part, but it worked out well. About 5 years ago, we started issuing iPads to our folks who were in the field because they had wireless cellular connection to our network that could be controlled. And they were pretty handy out in the field. What we found was that they didn't play very well with our PC desktops back in the office. And so about 4 years ago, when we did our IT refresh, we refreshed with Mac Minis and went to a Mac operating environment here. Well, when we were told to go home, all we had to do was unplug the Mac Minis. I told my folks, take the stuff home from on your desk and plug it into your iPad as a hotspot, and we have a secure VPN tunnel that is tethered to the iPad back to our network. So unlike the department, I do have a secure network even working from home. That was one of we spent a lot of time here trying to make sure that we didn't, that we weren't vulnerable there. The other things that we're doing has been slowed down. So not only the critical incidents, but we monitor the department's personnel misconduct investigations, their use of force reviews, their provision of medical services. Probably the biggest impact has been our monitoring of medical services because of this pandemic. The department we've suspended our inspections of their medical facilities because I don't want to send my folks into a hot area. And they're quite frankly really busy trying to take care of their patients and make sure that they're providing the care they need. The investigations and the use of force things we've been able to attend by telephone. So when their investigators do an interview, up until about a few days ago, they were still doing those face-to-face. We were attending by conference call. One of the bigger issues that we are watching right now is the overcrowding in the state prison. I don't know if you're familiar with the federal court action that's been taking place over the last week, but I can give you a quick thumbnail. So California for a number of years has been under a federal court order to remain below 135% of capacity. That was following a Supreme Court decision, and I think it was around 2015. At that time, the court set up a 3-judge panel, and they were empowered to release inmates if the state went over their 137.5% number. They never had to release any inmates because the state, through a number of initiatives, kept the numbers in state prisons below 137.5. And one of the things they did that, Steve, they had people in Louisiana. We had contract facilities out of state in Tennessee, Louisiana, Arizona, a couple other places. And it kept those numbers down. So there were never any inmates that were released. As the numbers have been coming down, we've been bringing inmates back from out of state. And now we have no one out of state. We're still slightly below that 137.5%. But with this, the communicability of this disease, inmate advocates are claiming that that number is too high. And so they went to the 3-judge panel last week with an emergency motion. The 3-judge panel found that they didn't have jurisdiction to release those inmates under the 3-judge panel because it was formed as a result of a different question of law. But they opined that the individual judges who were supervising the class action lawsuits that are the subject of these orders did have the authority to make releases, and that the plaintiffs had to go to those judges. Well, interestingly, the 3-judge panel is composed of the 3 judges from the other class action lawsuits. So they gave themselves jurisdiction in their own lawsuits to make releases, and there's a hearing tomorrow on one of those cases. The numbers are that we have about 46,000 inmates who live in a dormitory setting, and in those dormitory settings, although the overcrowding statewide is about 137%, in the dormitory settings, it ranges from about 140% to 175% overcrowded. And some of those places have as little as 48 inches between beds. So the places where this virus could run rampant is in those dorm settings where you can't isolate somebody. So there's going to be I think the state's going to have a big burden to overcome to defend that. The other numbers that are pushing us in the prisons is that about 30% of the prison population, and the prison population is about 126,000 right now, 30% of that population are mental health care recipients. And a big number of those require close provider contact almost every day. The court is concerned about how those inmates are being protected during the required treatment that, unless they get it, it's not constitutionally adequate confinement. And then finally, one interesting thing that we've seen is that the state has been able to fairly well control the spread of the disease among inmates in prison. So right now, out of that 126,000 population, as of yesterday afternoon, there were 18 inmates who were positive. However, the infection rate for the staff who are coming in and out every day is going up exponentially. And those are the people who are bringing the virus into the prison. So they are struggling right now to come up with a solution to keeping that virus out when the vector is the staff. So in my organization, we have about 120 people. I have probably, we've got 3 offices. So I've got a receptionist in each office who is keeping the doors open and answering the phones. Pretty much they're in the office by themselves most of the time. Do have a couple of business services folks who come in to handle bills. I mean, the bills still come and you got to pay them. So that kind of work is still going on. And then I do have a couple of HR folks who are coming in because we still have to do payroll and, you know, all those functions. But for the most part, our staff is not working in the office and they are sheltering at home. And we've had no cases in our office. So that's kind of where we're at this point.
Thank you, Roy. I think you're going to see that across the country, these issues of DOC staff getting testing positive, that's becoming a more and more difficult situation down here. And it's also an issue in local jails. So I don't know exactly what the response is going to be for that, because there are fundamental constraints, you know, and of course, when you start letting, you know, inmates out, that can present its own separate set of issues as far as public safety concerns. So thank you, Roy, for briefing us up on that. And
let me add just one more thing.
Sure.
There has been a fundamental difference between the jails and the prisons. So the jails have let a lot of people out and just release them on their own recognizance because most of the people in our jails are not serving a sentence. The Department of Corrections has stopped intake from the jails, and those folks are serving their sentence in the jails as opposed to coming to prison until this is over. But the state has been really reluctant to release convicted felons from the prisons. So it has been a much different mindset in the prisons and the jails.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you so much, Roy. And we may circle back around on that issue, because I know in different states that has become an issue. And I don't know, maybe even Melinda might have something to say about that. And I've actually got you next, Melinda, on the list of to talk about what's going on down in Florida. But I know that the DOC has got probably some similar challenges there to what Roy described and what a lot of us around the country are dealing with. But if you would just give us a quick overview of how things are going in Florida and what your biggest challenges are right now.
Well, certainly. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks so very much for the opportunity. Thanks, Ned, for getting this set up. I think it's great for us to get together and collaborate and talk about our issues amongst the Inspector General community. It's actually a little bit soothing to hear some of the challenges that you're experiencing, because they're very similar to my own. And so there is some bit of calming influence that having the ability to share our problems with one another is, with like-minded individuals with similar missions is really very inspiring here. So all of Florida's 67 counties have been affected by COVID-19 in some way or another. Our population in the state of Florida is around 22 million, and we have 14,747 confirmed cases with 296 deaths as of this morning. The governor oversees the entire state and most of the agencies. He's also head of the Florida National Guard. I'm currently in the Capitol with only my general counsel and my director of auditing. The rest of my staff have been teleworking since about April the 1st. We were doing some testing and doing some equipment assessments leading up to April the 1st. The state's whistleblower hotline is forwarded to a state cell phone at this particular time. That we have some pretty fancy software that can be uploaded to our surfaces that have been assigned to the staff, where it's a call feature that has got some noise canceling, so that if in the event that the whistleblower hotline, much like the governor's citizen services unit across the hall, they can actually telework and be at a remote location and still log their calls into what is called our CRM system, our case management and review system. So across the hall, they are full in force. All 15 of the governor's citizen services unit is on the job, and they're answering phones like crazy. They had something like 50,000 emails last week with 6,000 calls that they managed amongst the small staff that they have over for the governor's citizen services. That's predominantly from a spillover from the calls from the unemployment benefit compensation Connect system. So there was a crash of this, not a crash. There was some technical difficulties that overburdened the system on a grand scale. So typically the Connect system might receive 2 million calls in a 2-year period. However, there were some system problems that are currently laying at the feet of the contractor that was hired to install those, but they're also the legislative staff and members are calling for the removal of that agency head due to some of these problems. The calls that are hitting that particular unit for the unemployment compensation staff went from 2 million a year to over 2 million in a 2-week period. So those calls have been just overwhelming for the staff. There's been some system problems with PIN numbers. There's been lots of hang-up calls. There's been a whole host of issues. This system was audited by the Auditor General in 2015. There was some follow-up audits that of the 30 findings that they had that were fairly serious. There still remained about 17 findings in the follow-up that was just issued in March of 2020. And those findings clearly are the very same problems that they're experiencing today as a result of the huge influx of people in desperate need for these services and are attempting to get them, and many of them are not able to get them until some of the system problems have been resolved. It's been amazing to watch, though, the creativity of government in the face of a crisis. Whenever you see the Florida Department of Revenue and other agencies stepping up and loaning resources and or engaging to help alleviate. There were 70 extra servers that went online. There were over 100 employees that were on loan to receive training to be able to take up these calls, and hopefully we'll begin to see some relief. This week, it's still been very tense as people in desperate need have been calling, and they're obviously highly emotional because this truly affects their ability to put food on the table for their families. Some of the other issues that you mentioned, Roy, are definitely some of the concerns that we've been experiencing in the Florida Department of Corrections. Just yesterday, the Inspector General briefed the department where they were going to be doing some remote reviews now instead of in-person reviews for natural deaths. When there's a natural death that's not a suspicious death, they were going to transport those bodies to the hospital. Whenever the correctional inspectors go on site, they're actually going on site at a unit that neighbors the very unit that's responding to the COVID crisis in one of our counties. So they requested some temporary relief. There's been some struggles in the supply chain, specifically around PPE and masks. Our population occupancy rate in some of our hotels have dropped to 1%, 2%, and 5%, depending upon the area. So there's just a tremendous amount of impact to our infrastructure that's already heavily reliant upon sales tax and bed tax and tourism. With all of the colleges shut down and the schools shut down, it has been quite surreal. I've heard it described. My neighbors are all staying home. I'm the secretary of the Homeowners Association, and our board had a meeting, and 2 of our board members said because Melinda Miguel is reporting to work at the Capitol, they were going to attend the meeting by phone instead. So it's funny how you suddenly have a new set of respect for individuals and how they make their own individual choices about trying to stay safe. In fact, yesterday, a colleague from another private sector came and was giving away masks, fabric created masks that just 5 days before were taboo in our correctional areas because the perception of fear that having a mask on certain people inside the correctional facilities, it would create unnecessary fear. But as the CDC was issuing new rules, how quickly our society and our areas of our jurisdiction, how quickly they respond to the new guidance. And employees are obviously very nervous. Some of the employees are already starting to call our hotlines. We've had some inconsistencies in building closures or some inconsistent application by supervisors on the way that they grant telework or enforce working hours. And some of those complaints have already started coming forward. We do also feel a lot of the agencies that are on the front lines, such as the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation, they got their entrance letter from the Auditor General the last week of March, and the agency was quick to ask if we could reach out to the Auditor General and respectfully request an extension for the inception of their operational audit of the Florida Business and Professional Regulation. Same thing happened to the Florida National Guard. Our Department of Military Affairs is there to support the Florida National Guard administratively, and the Auditor General issued the first week of April, which was just a couple of days ago, I guess. So was maybe the 1st or 2nd, issued their engagement letter of their intent to audit the Florida Department of Military Affairs. And so I was able to request the Auditor General to work with us, and they were willing to maybe do some records requests so that it wasn't a hard stop of their audit during this time. They are teleworking as well. But if we could get some of the accounting records available to them, that maybe they'd be able to continue their audit of the departments. So we're excited to see the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee stood up. I was inspired to see that process and to wish I was there, Allison, to volunteer to be on the group. I certainly would be very quick to raise my hand. miss you guys up there in DC, but also glad to be back here in Florida. Allison mentioned some of the electronic digital signatures on the subpoenas, and we also have an electronic process for that. We were in the middle of doing a major investigation of a not-for-profit organization that had been able to draw down $7.5 million for their own individual payout for leave. The legislature, during legislative session, which ended in the middle of March, the legislative committees were very interested in this. We had several people investigating and several subpoenas that were outstanding. We've been able to continue receiving those documents during the course of this COVID kind of shutdown because we were getting everything electronically. And right now we have the benefit of the time to convert those documents and files into a usable and searchable form that maybe we would not have been able to do otherwise, just because we do have a little bit of extra time on our hand to be a little bit more deliberative about some of these things. So, you know, that's kind of an interesting dynamic of how everyone is on the front lines and everyone is so busy, and yet some of our operations have slowed. So it's kind of, it's very almost disturbing how, you know, like in a vacuum, whenever you have a fire and the fire is just burning full fledged, and then all of a sudden you open a window and how it just, the fire changes. It's kind of, I'm waiting for the shoe to drop with regards to either complaints or fraud. We're already seeing some of the fraud, price gouging, some of the provider fraud, some of the, you know, the Medicaid stuff. It's really just going to be a matter of time before we fully realize all the schemes, because the money hasn't really even started flowing. I am seeing an opportunity potentially for the IG community here in Florida to sit down with the folks that are making these fundings available, so that when people are applying for, say, a small business loan for relief, if we can reduce the impact of a clawback of those funds because we've provided proper oversight up front, then maybe we'll reduce the risk on the back end of having to pay those funds back, you know, 10 years from now. A couple of things we did in the immediate kind of notice of feeling that there were some issues that were about to happen with COVID. I sent out, we held a call with all of the agency inspectors general, and then we sent a follow-up set of questions for them to go into their agencies and ensure that they had. And so we wanted to be sure that we understood and had a list from our chief information officers in each of the agencies, that all mission critical applications, that if they failed, public safety or welfare or somehow would be compromised, do we know if these applications could be managed remotely? Did we have a remote CSIRT or incident response capability? Do we have our drive away instructions and ready availability of our COOP in hand, or continuation of operations? Do we have all the phone numbers that we need? Have we ensured that our offices will have 8 to 5 Monday through Friday phone coverage, even if everyone ends up working home remotely? Have we clarified the HIPAA requirements for protecting medical information of agency personnel in the event of exposure? We asked that each of the agency IGs get those questions answered, have those answers for themselves, not provide a response back to us, but just make sure that they were ready, available to know the answers to these. And that email was sent out on March 21st. And each of the 18 governors agencies have confirmed the answers to those questions. And I believe most of us are able to work in a telework kind of condition. I would say everybody has done the telework agreement that needs to. Everyone has assessed our technology needs, and many of us are working from home. The other day, the governor was having a press conference, and there was a question posed, and I had about an hour to determine the answer. because he was very concerned about fraud, and they were asking, what were our options, and did we have a call center sort of situation that we could or had already in our toolkit that could be stood up fairly rapidly with a response. We did a quick inventory, found out that we only have about 3 1-800 numbers in the state of Florida in the IG community. One of those is not even answered. It's one of the TIPS hotline at our Department of Corrections. The other one was the whistleblower hotline, and then the other one was at the Department of Transportation. And so we tested those lines. Turns out the whistleblower hotline, with our current capacity, remember how I mentioned that there was to the Capitol already, turns out we only had 60 lines coming into the Capitol. So they were having to revisit that and push that up to a 300 or more. And so if on a good day, our phone system, our hotline were operating at maximum capacity, it would come in on one of those 300 lines and would rotate to the state cell phone that is answering it remotely from home. And on a good day, if everything's working okay, it would rotate 3 times and then before going to voicemail. So imagine 3 individuals at home on 3 issued state phones, and then a call rolling to 1, and then it rolls to 2 because they're both on the phone. So it ends up with 3. 3 is on the phone. So it goes to voicemail. Now, who is going to check the voicemail of the 3 people that are in the chain that are all working remotely? So we quickly realized that the only way we could do a fraud hotline of the scale that was expected was really to contract out a consulting sort of call center type arrangement. And so we went to the 1-800 number. Bob, you'll appreciate this, at the Department of Transportation, and DeGreta answers the phone. When I called to test it, though, she was on the phone with Dawn, and so it rolled to voicemail. So it was like, okay, we don't have the capacity to really do what was needed, but to have those answers as a government, to know what your weaknesses areas are, and to see where you have room for improvement. I mean, it's really been amazing to watch government kind of evolve and reassess its position on so many things. And this is a real unique time in our history to really focus on what's important, what's our mission, and where can we add the most value. So this concept of independence is something that's something I grapple with every day. And, Marvin Doyle, who was my mentor and helped craft the Inspector General Act of 1978, and was there when President Reagan came in and fired all of the inspectors general in 1980. He would say, and y'all all know Marvin, or many of you do, he would say that you can sometimes be as independent as a hog on ice. And so, I think in these times, while we need to focus on independence, I think we first need to focus on integrity. So our integrity speaks to the ability to help, because to be totally independent in an interdependent world, while it's one of our fundamental tenets as inspectors general, we really have to help one another. We really have to help our agencies, and we really have to work proactively to make it through these times, and to make it through these times successfully and healthily, and with our focus on speaking truth to those in power that need to hear the undiluted truth. And with that, Stephen, I'm gonna pass back to you.
Thank you, Melinda. That was, boy, there was a lot to unpack there. I can tell you what you were, just a personal observation with the call capacity that you're talking about. I can recall after Katrina, one day, but I was working for the Attorney General at the time, but I took personally 100 phone calls in one day. That was between 7:30 in the morning and 5 p.m. But I handled personally 100 phone calls, and I can only imagine how difficult that is going to be. It's going to require additional capacity and additional personnel. And your points about interdependence is well taken. I have been on the phone with all sorts of local law enforcement this week because we're getting a lot of complaints about people violating social distancing.
Mm.
And, you know, and I'm sure you guys, and I may, as I'm getting ready to throw it to you, Carolyn, that you may speak to that and to other challenges that you're facing. But when we get those complaints, and in fact, I was on the phone yesterday with a lady who was just beside herself because there was a neighborhood grocery that had everybody dining in, sitting at tables together and all of this. And I said, well, you need to call the sheriff. And she says, well, it's the sheriff and his deputies that are sitting there doing it. I was like, well, so there's Louisiana for you. But I was able to get on the phone with the sheriff and let him know that we had received this complaint and said, look, this is a local law enforcement issue. But he knows that I sent it to him, and he knows that I'll probably be checking back. But we do have to have the ability to all be rowing in the same direction right now. This is just too big for any of us on our own. So, Carolyn, I'm sorry that we put you towards the back of the line here, but Lord knows you are probably facing some of the biggest challenges of all right there in New York. So let me throw it to you and just tell us what you're going through. Tell us, what's going on with the subway system. What's going on with just in Manhattan in general and your neck of the woods.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Okay, sorry about that.
Great. Thank you so much. And Melinda, a lot of what you said about contributing to the larger state effort really resonated with me. And frankly, you made me feel better about some of the choices that I made. I'm one of the newer IGs in this group. I was only appointed over the summer. So it's just very reassuring to hear some of the more experienced folks in this crowd speak. And so I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing to try and contribute to the larger state effort. So I'm Carolyn Pokorny. I'm sorry to be meeting all of you like this, but I so appreciate this opportunity to get together and have this really important conversation during the middle of this pandemic. So a little bit of background about the MTA. We're the largest transit system in the United States. So, and it consists of many other agencies, each of which is really massive in its own right. New York City Transit, so you're talking about the subways and bus system. We have several railroads, many of the areas, bridges and tunnels. We also have our own police force. Our employees number over 70,000, and our budget is about 16 billion a year. So a very big agency, massive workforce, huge budget. I want to give you a little bit of context because we were at such a critical delegate juncture before this started, and that's really put us in an incredibly difficult situation. So why is that? The state had literally just agreed, and I mean a few weeks ago, to a massive capital construction plan, a $51 billion capital construction plan, lots of construction and infrastructure underway. To support that massive construction plan, the MTA was counting on getting approval for congestion pricing in Manhattan, meaning drivers were going to get charged for driving into Manhattan in the busiest areas at the busiest times. So the timing of that is now extremely uncertain. And the MTA had agreed to undergo a huge transformation effort. We call it the transformation plan very aptly, streamlining, cutting positions, cutting costs, and add into that mix, even on a good day, the MTA is servicing tens of billions of dollars of debt. So that's just where we were going into this. So what's happening now? The MTA's importance for the entire region has been really highlighted in this. Many of the MTA's workers, the drivers, the conductors, et cetera, have been deemed essential personnel. And that's because keeping our public transportation system in New York City up and running is key to enabling all of the other essential personnel getting where they need to go, the first responders, the healthcare workers, the National Guard. In New York City, we're not a car culture. We are a public transportation culture, and many folks don't just rely on the public transportation for commuting. They really that's their main mode of transportation for everything. The human toll of this virus on the MTA has been completely devastating. words cannot tell you how distressing it is. Many of the workers were either in spaces where it was difficult to socially distance or they had to interact with the public. The workers have been extremely concerned about getting access to PPE, which is understandable. The agency has been distributing large quantities of PPE, millions of gloves, something like 2.5 million pairs of gloves, hundreds of thousands of face masks. But still, to date, we have 1,500 workers. These are the stats as of yesterday. 1,500 MTA workers tested positive, and 41 have died as a result of the virus. And so when I just think of that number, for any agency to suffer a loss of 41 employees in the time span of a few weeks, it is absolutely horrific. You throw on top of that other emergencies still happen. So to pile onto this, just a few weeks ago, March 27th, we had a terrible, terrible incident that is under criminal investigation where a fire started on one of the subways, and the subway conductor was very heroic, got many of the passengers out, but the subway conductor died. So for any agency to experience something like that during normal times would be tragic, but you throw that in the middle of a pandemic and you get a sense of the human toll at the MTA. The fiscal side is also grim. As a result of the pandemic, the MTA is under even more financial strain than they were before. The transformation effort, many parts of it are on pause. Ridership has plummeted. Along with it, revenues. Some say there's an upshot to the ridership plummeting because it means people are staying home and socially distancing, but it means that the revenues are dramatically down. On a positive note, the MTA got about $4 billion from the CARE Act, and they're going to need a lot more money from the federal government to keep going. In terms of my own office's budget, we haven't been cut, but I'm hearing anecdotally from at least one other transportation IG's office that they've had to furlough some of their employees and take a pay cut. So in a nutshell, it's a really challenging environment for the MTA with a lot of stress and tensions running very high. So I want to talk a little bit about what my office is doing. It's been really gratifying and interesting to hear what the other offices are up to as well. I'll start with kind of some of the practical stuff, the operations side, and then I'll go into the substance, and then I'll finish up with how we're helping the larger state effort. So in early March, we started prepping to have most of my staff in a position to telecommute, including support and admin. So we're getting mail, phone calls are all being forwarded so that folks can field that from out of the office. Our hotline, complaint and tip line is all being run remotely at this point. Our goal was to basically have everybody plugged in as much as possible, including support and admin. Most of my folks' last day in the office was, I think, March 16th. At this point, I'm literally the only person going into the office, and I'm doing a fair amount of teleworking. Health-wise, a key member of my staff who helped the entire office get into a position to telework herself tested positive for COVID. That necessitated almost my entire office having to go into a preventative quarantine. That at least has ended on a positive note in that the employee is recuperating, although she's a young woman and it's taking her a very long time. And thank God nobody else in my office caught COVID as a result of that. Two things made teleworking practical and doable for us. We had a very, very lucky break in that we were in the middle of an IT refresh. We had an outside consultant who was helping us upgrade all of our servers. And so we were able to expand that contract. If we didn't have that in place, we would have been in a real bind. So that outside consultant is helping us work remotely very well. And then the second is that we were able to get our hands on a lot of mobile equipment. We had a whole plan about how we were getting the office mobile by the end of this year. We weren't quite there yet. We were able to get our hands on several more laptops and phones and thumb drives by leveraging the relationships that the vendors had with the MTA, which is a huge buyer of these. All of these items became almost impossible to find pretty early in March as folks saw this coming down the pipe. So that's what my office is doing operationally. Let me talk a little bit about substantively. On my legal and investigation side, we reached out to the MTA early on to see were they going to be pursuing disciplinary actions against employees. They said it was, as a practical matter, almost impossible in this environment. So unless it was something going to safety or a key security, they were not going to be able to pursue it. So we have been holding off on sending any recommendations unless they fall into those categories, and we haven't had them. So we're holding on to those. We also temporarily have put a pause on most of our floor checks and field visits. And what that I mean, physically visiting sites. We often go out to different transit yards and other areas where employees work, as well as different construction sites. That's now being limited to the times when we feel it's been heavily curtailed, and we're only doing it where our own employees can socially distance from the workers and where they can also socially distance from each other. So that's been heavily limited. We're also plowing ahead on everything else that we can do remotely. It sounds like everybody else is in the same boat. We're drafting reports as best we can. We're gathering information. We're doing data analytics. We're not doing any face-to-face interviews. We're only doing interviews that we feel can be done effectively over the phone. If we think face-to-face is needed, we are pushing that can down the road until they can be done safely. We're having some challenges because the MTA is so stressed that they're not always available, understandably, for our interviews. So we're trying to be very respectful of that. As for construction projects, and this is something to keep in mind for the other IG's offices that have to have oversight over construction projects, we early on wanted to know, what is the plan if this construction project is going to be shut down? What is your security plan? What's happening with the materials, the valuable materials and equipment that's at the site? And initially we were being told, no, it's full steam ahead. We're going ahead with all of these construction projects. Now, unsurprisingly, circumstances have drastically changed. Most of the construction projects, if not all, are being shut down. And so we're shifting gears more towards checking in to see, are you implementing those security plans? What are the plans? And to the extent we can go check in on them safely, we're going to try and do that. So that's on my legal investigation side. As for my audit team, they've been working on finalizing reports and analyzing the data sets to the extent we already had the data sets on hand. And we made a decision fairly early on that we're not sending any draft reports over to the agency right now. We're simply getting them ready on our own side so that we're in a position to hit send if we can when the pandemic passes. My audit team has also been gathering intel, and we've been providing some real-time monitoring. They've been asking how different MTA agencies are tracking their emergency procurements and the costs associated with them, because we know a lot will be reimbursable at the end. Some of the other speakers have alluded to this. So to the extent we can make sure they're doing good quality control on the front end, we want to make sure that they're doing that, and they've been extremely receptive to that. We also did some research on what happened after Superstorm Sandy, and there are a lot of great reports from the folks in this group on what happened after Sandy. There were some negative findings against different state agencies in New York, against the city of New York itself, and some really excellent recommendations. So it was just incredibly instructive to see the work that came out of this group after Superstorm Sandy. And we're also just contacting the MTA employees and management to see how this is impacting their work, whether it's accounts payable, whether it's pushing forward the agency initiatives like that big transformation initiative I mentioned. They had a big initiative to reduce overtime costs. Basically, we're just learning about the problems they're facing now and how that's going to impact everything down the road. So in the meanwhile, we are pitching in to help the larger state mission. There is a sense that New York State really needs all hands on deck right now to get us through this. For my office, the participation has been voluntary. We haven't been conscripted. And there are a number of different volunteering opportunities in my state, which include the state IG. There is a separate IG for the state of New York who oversees the other agencies other than the MTA. She's doing real-time monitoring and oversight of inventory with the goal of giving feedback and value in real time. There are a number of state hotlines. It sounds like a number of the other states have similar hotlines going. In our state, we have a health hotline that connects callers with the ability to do drive-through testing, the ability to get tested for COVID while sitting in your car. There are folks volunteering for that. We have admin staff who are working on a hotline to help folks who are unemployed get their unemployment insurance processed. It sounds like, Melinda, in Florida, you're having similar issues. Our Department of Labor has been absolutely slammed and inundated with calls. And so they put out that request to have folks help man their phones. And we sent our communications team out to assist some other agencies who are also just getting slammed with requests for information. So I have an incredibly strong team. I'm very proud of them. I'm so grateful. They've had a great attitude through all of this. And so the bottom line is I'm just trying to do the best I can to make sure that we're pitching into the overall state effort while still keeping good work afloat. I'm concerned, like some of the other folks are here, about what will the end of the year look like for us? What will our annual report look like? What will we have to show for our time? Finally, there is, I think, an elephant in the room here, which is that we've had IG colleagues get fired and get criticized very, very publicly in the middle of this pandemic. And it's just distressing to me personally and professionally, at the very least. I think it's also really a galvanizing moment, I hope, for all of us on so many levels, not the least of which is we have to stay true to our core values and our core mission. And Melinda, you know, when you said that very much resonated with me. So I know I'm one of the newest members of the group. As I mentioned, I only got appointed a few months ago, but I've always admired the work of this group. I'm a former federal prosecutor, and so I always worked very collaboratively with the IG community. But since I'm in a region that's a few weeks ahead of folks, where some of you may be in terms of the pandemic, I just want to say, if anyone wants to email or call me, whether you're on the call now or whether you see this in the future, if you need any thoughts on getting your office into telework mode, if you're dealing with an employee who has COVID, having to deal with how to quarantine, or if you want to hear about volunteering with a larger state effort, I'm just very happy to talk to you, and I'm really pleased to now be a member of this community.
Carolyn, that's awesome. Thank you so much. We're so glad to have you. Welcome. I mean, truly. And what you said definitely resonates. There's not a single one of us in this group that has not been under various forms of duress as an IG. I have my own unique story that you can Google when all this is over about the travails that I've been through down here in Louisiana. So what you said and what Melinda said was just perfect. Stay true to your core mission. We're not going to let anything throw us off of that. And I think that you know, this too shall pass, and we will continue. Natalie, one of the things that we wanted to talk about is the technical side of functioning remotely as an IG's office. And I know a couple of us have touched on that. Roy touched on it. But can you just give us an overview of how things are there in Boston? Like what are you doing to try to further the mission of your office, and how are you accomplishing that from a logistical and technological standpoint? Why don't you start there and then sort of give us an overview of other issues that you feel are important?
Thanks, Nancy, and thanks, Ned, for putting this together. This is a really important program, and I also want to thank Greg Hill, our executive director, for also helping put this together. So thank you both, and I'm really pleased to be on the panel. Uh, just to give you an overview of Massachusetts, we have a population of about 7 million, and as of yesterday, we had a little over 15,000 people who tested positive. We've tested in the state about 84,000 people, and we've had 352 deaths. Governor Baker, our governor, anticipates that the number of cases could be as high as 175,000. So nowhere, everywhere is affected, and we're expecting a pretty big effect here. With respect to our office, we have been completely remote telecommuting since March 13th, and we feel really fortunate because we started talking about this, about how do we respond to this potential pandemic in February, and I think because we were able to talk about it early, and because frankly I've got a fantastic staff, we've got 75 people, we were able to move to complete telework fairly quickly. Well, it wasn't easy, it was far from easy, but fairly quickly moved to telework. We have all our hotlines are being operated remotely, all just like as Carolyn said, all of our mail is forwarded. We have a process for even getting documents that we've summoned to the people who need to get them, to the people working remotely. We have a very robust training program. We train about 2,000 people a year, and we've moved. Most of our training is live in our classroom. We've moved all of our classes for the rest of the semester, which goes through June 30th, online. And we did that. We lost about 2 weeks of classes. And then from there, our classes are going to be all online. All of our investigations, luckily, we've been actually really fortunate to be able to move most of our investigations forward. We had some big grand jury cases and some criminal cases that are on hold. But what we've done for our investigations, we moved to looking at most of the cases that we have that are paper heavy, and we have a very very robust database that we can use. I don't know if people are familiar with it, Summation, that we all can access remotely. So people have to use a lot of technology to continue to move their cases forward. And we've also looked at a lot of publicly available information out publicly that we can access during the time that we're working remotely in order to continue our cases. Picking up on something that Rhonda said about just being inspired by people. Our office has jurisdiction over all of state government and all of municipal government. And we have really been amazed at, in this time of a pandemic, people are working, and they're working really hard, and they're being responsive to our office and continuing to work with us. And we really, I will be honest, I was not expecting that. I thought everyone would be focused on other things, and people have really, it's been very inspiring to me how hard our state and local employees have been working. And I think too often we don't get a great rap as being public employees. So our investigations are moving forward, and our reviews and our audits are similarly moving forward in a similar manner. How did we get to the point where we could have all of our work really remotely? And as I said, we did it quickly, but it was far from easy. We started in February. We looked at who needs laptops, who has VPN, virtual private network, who has access to our VPN. What are the other materials besides laptops that people would need to have at home? So I'm using a monitor and a camera that we purchased in addition to my laptop. So what other equipment would people need? What paper files would people need to bring home to work on them? And can we get those on in electronic format? So we tried to look at this, even starting in February, of what if we have to be home for 2 months, which at the time seemed absurd, but it now doesn't seem all that unreasonable. So we even looked at, will people need a skate car perhaps, or more webcams, copy paper. What are all the supplies that we will need, all the equipment that we need to have in case not only when we're teleworking, but our building is closed so that we can't go into the building. We have everything that we need to operate offline in someone's house, and we have a protocol in place on how to get it from one place to the other. We also looked at our internal controls. Despite the fact that we're all working remotely, we all need to have internal controls. We've all talked about integrity and accountability, and that's one of the things that we take very seriously. And we said, so we looked at what are internal controls, how do we need to modify them to accommodate teleworking. We also looked at our policies. What policies do we need to change? What policies? An easy example, of course, is telecommuting policies. Previously, you could not telecommute if you had childcare, and you had to telecommute between certain hours. Well, in this kind of a crisis, that's not really reasonable. And one of the sort of themes that we have been trying to keep in the back of our mind is that we really aren't telecommuting, we're working during a health crisis. And that's really two different things. And so we, as employers, we have to plan accordingly and apply our policies accordingly. So we looked at all of our telecommuting policies. We looked at the use of personal computers because despite our best efforts, not everyone can get a computer right away. So we revised those policies. What is the proper use of sick leave? Before FICRA came in, we modified our sick leave policies so that people who were taking care of children at home and who couldn't work out of the normal business hours, couldn't flex their schedules, could use sick time. We looked at our policies for when if someone is diagnosed with COVID-19, what are our obligations for reporting that to the other staff, and what should our protocol be with respect to that individual employee as far as sick leave and reporting. So we really tried to look at all of our policies. We talked about confidentiality quite a bit. How do we work remotely and address our confidentiality concerns? And we looked at it both from within the office, when we're communicating within the office and doing our work within the office, and also how do you maintain confidentiality outside of the office? And just like, for instance, what can you use Zoom? If you use Zoom to do an interview or a meeting with someone from an outside agency, what are the security concerns with that? Because typically we don't allow individuals to tape or record our interviews, but how do you adjust for that when you're talking to someone over the internet and they may have the ability to record? So we tried to look at all of the issues with respect to confidentiality. And then the last thing that I'll touch on for me was one of the biggest issues was staff. Number one, how are people going to work from home? Because most of our work really isn't set up for telecommuting. We have before this, had a very limited telecommuting policy. So as I mentioned earlier, we were very impressed with the staff came forward and identified projects that they would work on and cases that they would that they could continue to work on. And for the folks, the administrative folks who perhaps don't have enough work, wouldn't have a lot of work to do at home, we came up with a list of what we call blue sky projects. What are the projects that other people have been trying to get done, that have wanted to work on for a really long time? Could other people do those? So that we made sure that people continued working. We also made sure that people got all the training. People talked about doing additional training. And we're also in the process of implementing volunteering. We're going to be able to volunteer as far as Carolyn said, giving back to the community. We are going to allow people to volunteer for a certain number of hours a month, and that will count towards their work. And so number one was how do we make sure we have to make sure people have enough work. We did that. We felt we needed to set clear expectations for people. That's one of the really big lessons from the outset, especially for people who've never telecommuted before. So what are the expectations for using a computer, for who can access that computer? What are the reporting requirements? And just to touch on that for a minute, to give an example, We do check-in meetings quite regularly with our employees. We have senior staff meetings, 3 times a week to check in with senior staff. And we regularly have our staff send us work reports. What are they working on? And also what is their work plan for the next day? And it sounds a little bit like perhaps like micromanaging, but there are really 2 important purposes of it. It helps us know what's going on, but it also helps us keep in touch with staff, because one of the things we don't want to forget about is this is a human health crisis, and people aren't used to working remotely day after day after day. So part of our responsibility as head of the agency is to make sure that our staff feels connected, engaged, and that we have enough communication with them that we know if a staff either doesn't have enough work or is having some personal issue, we can, as supervisors, help them. So I try to speak fast, very quickly, so that I know we're short on time. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Stephen.
Yeah, you did great, Natalie. Thank you so much. Those were all great points, and it was fascinating to hear the kind of stuff, just things like copy paper. That's the stuff that you don't even really think of, right? So thank you so much for that. Now we're at the back as an update, because while I've been sitting here, the new numbers for Louisiana came in, and you'll notice, and there is a ray of sunshine in these numbers, although it may not seem that way at first. I told you at the beginning of the call that we had 16,284 cases, which is roughly the same number that Roy referred to in California. Considering that our population is 3 million and California is 40 million, that's a pretty staggering number here in Louisiana. Well, the numbers were just updated. We now have 17,030 cases. And the deaths have gone from 582 up to 652. Now, those are obviously very grim numbers, but there are 2 highly encouraging numbers to me that suggest that we may be getting on the back side of the curve here. And one of those is the number of people that are hospitalized has actually gone down, and the number of people that are on ventilators has also gone down. And the rate of increase in deaths, if that makes any sense, has also gone down from what we've seen over the last few days. So that seems to me that it's an indication that social distancing may actually be working. And so I pray that the same situation exists in some of your states. We all have different circumstances, I know. But I do believe that we are going to get through this. And I think that, as I've said, that on the other side of it, the sun is going to shine very brightly. I believe the economy will come back. I think that it's going to need, obviously, some help. But that, hopefully that's, and then our goal is going to be in the IG community to make sure that the people's money is treated properly, right? And also that we, that we are participants in sort of a team effort to defeat this thing and to deal with the aftermath of it. So, having said that, Ned, I don't know if you've got any raised hands there.
Not seeing any raised hands.
Okay, well, and then I'm not a firm believer, guys, in talking just to hear myself talk, and we're not beholden to go the entire 2 hours. I will tell you guys that the way that this call has gone today, I think, is very encouraging, and I think it's the type of thing that we ought to seek to do again. And let me, this is one thing that I'd forgotten to mention earlier, because Natalie brought it up. Greg Hill has done such an outstanding job since he took over in February. And he came to New York. I don't think he had any idea that he would be stepping into one of the most difficult situations imaginable, to try to be the executive director of this organization with all of Manhattan shut down. But I just want to thank him personally, because he's been effortless to work with. He has been responsive every single time I've needed to speak to him on the phone. He's been right there. He responds immediately to emails. He's proactive. I can't praise him enough. And Ron Calvosa did a super job, and it's I think most people would have been very forgiving had there been some drop off while Greg got his legs under him. But I'm telling you that he stepped in, and there was, with Frank's help and with other members of the staff, he's just been superb. So I want to make sure that if you guys haven't met Greg, I hope you'll get the chance to at least speak to him or reach out to him by email. He's really done a great job for us. So, and I think that we're going to continue to communicate with members on areas of concern. And I'd like you guys to think about specific areas where we can perhaps address specialized subject matter as this thing goes forward, like issues that come up where we may have speakers with expertise in that particular area, where we can do these sorts of calls. Because I know, there will be opportunities, obviously, with everybody teleworking, to dial into these things. Are there any other comments? Yes.
We have a question.
Yes.
Catherine Richards from the City of Chicago Office of Inspector General.
Excellent.
I did have a question, just to follow up on something that it was Carolyn said about reaching out to the agency and employees within the agency to see how COVID has been affecting them. Wondering if you could speak a little bit more about that sort of proactive outreach.
That's an excellent question, Catherine. Thank you so much for putting that out there. I will go first, but then I would like to throw it to my colleagues as well. I will tell you that I have been communicating individually with members of my staff, and I don't hound them every day because we have a chain of command here, and I'll let the supervisors kind of be the main points of contact. But I have made it a point as the Inspector General to personally call and have conversations with the folks that are at home. I want to know how they're doing. I want to know how their families are doing. I want to know if anybody in their families has been affected by this in terms of illness or such. I can tell you that my own son had to quarantine for 14 days, which was an adventure in and of itself. But if we have time, I'll tell that story another time. But I think it's as the leader of your agency, and some of you are in charge of very, very large agencies, so that it's not really logistically possible or practically possible for you to reach out to all of them. At that point, you might use email. But I think if you can make personal phone calls to people, especially ones that you are aware are going through a particularly tough time. I had one this morning whose father passed away today. It was not from COVID. He was at home in hospice care for cancer. But nonetheless, it's difficult, when any employee loses a family member like that. So you want to let them know that you care at this time. This is tough on everybody. It really is. What I have chosen to do is to, rather than to dwell on the negative, because Lord knows there's enough of the negative out there, I'm trying to encourage people, let them know that this too shall pass, that we are going to get through it, and that we're going to be a hell of a lot stronger on the other side. And so that's my 2 cents. I don't know if any of my colleagues want to chime in.
Sure. Yeah. So when we moved to an offsite environment, we found that communication with people who went home was absolutely key to morale. So from the first day that we sent people home, I began a daily email, sort of a wrap-up email at the end of the day to tell everybody, here's what we've done today. Here's the latest news. And oftentimes it was stuff that I've gleaned from looking at the Department of Corrections website, news conferences, but also from my talks with folks in those agencies that may not have made a press release. That was received very well by our folks. They felt a connection to the office that otherwise would have been missing. The other thing that we did is I have now a morning teleconference with my executive staff. Every morning we start the day with a teleconference where they bring to me issues that have bubbled up to them, and we have a roundtable. It takes about a half an hour but we have a pretty good handle on what's going on in each silo in the office, and so that's been very handy. The other thing that we did was we procured 4 conference lines. One is an executive conference line, and then for my my top managers who supervise each line in our office, they have their own conference line, and they spend the day starting sort of a cascading conference where they start with their supervisors, and then they add in the line staff, and some of them are doing those conferences a couple of times a day, so they're keeping their staff engaged and dealing with problems in real time. And then finally, we leveraged our website as a communication tool. So things that we didn't normally post on our website, we're now posting so people can go to the website and see a link that might answer a question they have or give them information. I think that has been the biggest takeaway we got from this, is how key those communications are to keeping people on task, and the morale. When you're not in the office, you can get lonely, and I think that you have to be creative to deal with that. So that's how we've done it.
Excellent.
Stephen, I'll just add that we have taken a similar approach. We do this Inspector General and I do a check-in with every staff member at least once a week, so that we keep in touch. And we also have, like Roy, we have a weekly or bi-weekly message that we send out to all staff. We have regular Zoom meetings. All of our divisions, each division has a Zoom account that they can use, and we have a couple of extras so that we keep everybody connected. We've already had an all-staff meeting using Zoom, which actually was very effective. People were really happy to see each other. And then we recently started, or we're just about to start, a Zoom water cooler. Basically, every division is going to host a half-an-hour Zoom drop-in so that people can just stay connected. Because, as Roy said, communication and connectedness is critical during this time. So those are some of the strategies that we've been using, and I would love to hear others that people are using, because we want to keep as connected with people as we can.
That's great. Okay, I have a question actually from Glenda Arrington, who is on the call, I guess, but not able to use the online function. But I'll just read it to you guys and throw it out there for anybody. Glenda is curious if any of us have experienced staff wanting to telework in a location other than their telework residence to take care of an elderly parent. And the telework is not normally for childcare in the federal government, but wanted to know how it's being addressed for those wanting to telework out of state, for example. And I'm not in a position to answer that, because that doesn't apply to anything that we've experienced. But have any of you had a situation where your employees are not working from their actual residence, but they are maybe going out of state or to some other location?
Natalie.
I have. We have people who have had to go home to take care of their family members, and we have allowed it in this situation. And we've made it very clear you have to telework from one place, so you can't go to a coffee shop. Hopefully, no one's going to coffee shops anyway. But you have to telework from one place. But if that place is where your parents are, absolutely you can do that. And we've mailed equipment to people so they can do that.
Yeah.
And we've also really been flexible with the hours that people can work, because we know that people are homeschooling their kids, they're taking care of elderly parents. So we have really been very flexible in both where people work and what times they work.
Excellent.
Yes, excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
We've done the same thing. We, as in the federal government, ordinarily you can't your kids have to be taken care of. You shouldn't be looking after children, but obviously with all the schools in Maryland, Virginia, and the district closed right now, and a very young staff with lots of young children, I have lots of staff who are having to balance doing their work with looking after dependents, and not just young but older. So we are definitely allowing that. We've expanded the time frames. We've gotten rid of the time frame and allowed employees to choose when it will suit them to get their time in, unless there's a specific need for a meeting. But we also have some employees, like my head of audits was in Colorado skiing when we went all telework, and he owns a house there and stayed there. And he's as capable of getting his work done there and staying in contact with his employees. And so I've supported that and would support any other requests, as people try to get through the challenges they're experiencing now. And I did have one point on I love the idea of a Zoom water cooler. I'm going to take that back. But my head of investigations has an ongoing kind of trivia with the staff every day. And they've had for the first several days, they'd end the day with a picture of someone's first car. Guess whose first car this was? And they're accumulating points because they are all extremely competitive. Now we've switched into alma maters, and I don't know what they will do next, but that's contributing to morale. Other people are starting some meetings with 2 truths and a lie, just as a way of keeping people engaged. And the challenge we have is there's probably about 50% of our staff who love being alone, and 50% of our staff who are losing their mind. And
Right.
Trying to thread the needle there is part of the challenge you face as a leader. Thank you.
It's interesting, Allison, with and the rest of you. Somebody asked me, they said, what is the biggest change you've experienced? And I said, well, I put on about 10 pounds and I'm drinking a lot more whiskey. And I'm not sure that either one of those things are good. So, and I'm being flippant, of course, but anyway, we do have to recognize that people are going through the same emotional swings as the rest of us. And I had commented not that long ago on how important it is for IGs to have that calm presence during any crisis. And I'm amazed, and not amazed. I'm actually fully expected it with this group, but it's incredible to see the calm, collected leadership that's here. There's nobody running around with their hair on fire. That's just a testament to the strength of this community, and how honored I am to be a part of it and to be the president of this group. Thank you for attending our webinar today. We hope that you have gotten some useful information on how inspectors general's offices can function going forward. And we hope also to be able to do more of these webinars on topics of interest to the IG community as we continue to fight the challenges and hopefully overcome them very soon of this coronavirus pandemic. Thank you.